Welcome to Whispers and Footsteps, where every video invites you into a world of subtle clues, hidden motives, and cozy suspense. Here you'll find original mystery narratives, thought-provoking discussions about detective fiction, and occasional deep dives into storytelling techniques. Subscribe for new mysteries, analysis of classic detective tales, and tips on crafting your own twists and red herrings. Don't forget to click the bell so you never miss a fresh clue. And before you go, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? It's fascinating to see how mystery lovers connect from every corner of the globe. Hercule Poirot and the Obsidian Mirror Mystery. Chapter 1. An Invitation to Maplehurst. It was one of those crisp March mornings that arrive like a freshly ironed linen sheet after days of drizzle. The sun shone generously upon the streets of London, glinting off handsome cab wheels and sparkling on slate rooftops, and Hercule Poirot, ensconced in his armchair near the window of Whitehaven Mansions, held a small embossed card delicately between his fingertips. Across from him, I sat at the breakfast table finishing my second cup of tea. The card, cream-coloured with gold trim, had arrived with the morning post, accompanied by a short but finely worded letter. "Another case, Poirot?" I ventured, folding the newspaper and leaning forward with interest. Poirot's moustaches twitched with satisfaction. "Not yet, mon ami. Not a crime, but an invitation. Observe, it comes from Monsieur Sebastian Harwood, a gentleman of no small reputation in archaeological circles." "Harwood, isn't he the one who made that controversial find in the Valley of the Nobles last year?" I asked. "Précisément. A tomb without a name, but filled with items of ceremonial value. And one particular relic, a mirror of black obsidian, has, it seems, captured his imagination, so much so that he has made it the centerpiece of his collection at Maplehurst Hall, his country estate in Buckinghamshire." I frowned. "And what does he want with you?" Poirot adjusted the angle of the invitation card on the table, like a man arranging chess pieces. "He invites us to a house party, a rather exclusive gathering," he writes. I find myself increasingly disturbed by the presence of the mirror. It is absurd, of course, but something is not right. Perhaps your famed rationality will relieve me of these unscientific fancies. I raised an eyebrow. "Superstitious, is he?" Poirot gave a small shrug. "Not, but perhaps a little impressionable, or guilty. We shall see." A few days later, we were bound for Buckinghamshire, our luggage neatly stacked, and the spring countryside unfolding outside the train window in soft greens and pale golds. The scent of daffodils drifted through a partially open window, and I must confess I felt a certain delight at the prospect of a quiet weekend in the country, far from the clamour of London and the smell of gas lamps. The taxi deposited us at the end of a long gravel drive, flanked by young birch trees. Maplehurst Hall stood ahead, grand yet understated, its stone facade softened by ivy and early blooming wisteria. The front door was opened by a stiff-necked butler whose manner suggested service to a house older and grander than this one truly was. "Messieurs Poirot and Hastings," Poirot announced, with a little flourish of his hat. The butler gave a shallow bow. "Mr. Harwood is expecting you in the drawing room." The interior of Maplehurst was as tastefully assembled as its owner's reputation suggested. Antique furnishings, oriental rugs, and artifacts displayed in low-lit alcoves like silent sentinels. In the centre of the drawing room stood Sebastian Harwood, tall, silver-haired, with an angular face and eyes that flickered like candlelight. "Poirot, a pleasure. And Captain Hastings, I presume?" he said, his voice cultured, but carrying a faint rasp like fine gravel beneath a boot. After pleasantries, Harwood led us to a smaller room adjoining the library. "I wish to show you this in private," he said, unlocking a glass case with a small bronze key. Inside rested a mirror, no larger than a dinner plate, set in a frame of dull gold inlaid with lapis and turquoise. The surface of the glass was pitch black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. "A scrying mirror, I believe," Harwood said softly. "It was found among the funerary goods of the unnamed tomb. My colleagues laughed when I brought it back, said it was nothing but a vanity object, but since placing it here, there have been occurrences, the sound of footsteps in empty corridors, whispers when no one is speaking, most absurd." He looked at Poirot with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm likely being fanciful." Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the mirror. "A man of logic may still feel the unease of the unknown, Monsieur Harwood, but let us not be premature in judging shadows." That evening, the rest of the guests arrived, each more intriguing than the last. There was Lady Rowena Wellborn, a stately widow of high breeding with a withering gaze and a fondness for sherry. She claimed to be an old friend of Harwood's late wife, though her clipped remarks suggested rivalry rather than friendship. Then came Major Ronald Darnley, a sun-leathered military man recently returned from Cairo. He was loud, fond of cigars, and spoke of Egypt with equal parts affection and disdain. The young actress, Miss Elvira March, swept in next, cloaked in perfume and mystery, her green eyes flicking across the room with trained, theatrical effect. Finally, there was Miss Lydia Harwood, Sebastian's younger sister by nearly 20 years, a soft-spoken woman with expressive eyes and a nervous energy she could not mask. She greeted Poirot and me politely, though she seemed perpetually on edge. Dinner was served in a richly panelled dining room beneath a reproduction of the Banquet of Cleopatra. As conversation turned from travel to politics to theatre, Poirot observed in silence, occasionally sipping his wine and making the sort of internal notations I had long since stopped trying to interpret. After the meal, we retired to the drawing room. The obsidian mirror had been brought down and placed on the mantel, and though no one commented on it directly, I sensed that several guests avoided looking at it. Harwood, standing by the fireplace, turned to us. "I have something of a tradition," he said, swirling the brandy in his glass. "When I invite guests here, I ask them to offer one mystery they have experienced in their lives, be it unexplained, unresolved, or merely peculiar. We share them over the evenings and see whether clearer minds can offer answers." "A parlour game?" Lady Wellborn asked archly. "Call it that if you wish," Harwood replied. "But it's surprising what surfaces when people are in company, away from the city, surrounded by history." Poirot smiled faintly. "Eh bien, monsieur, you may find that sometimes mysteries are closer than one realizes." The fire popped in the grate, and outside the wind whispered faintly against the windows. The mirror sat in stillness above the hearth, its surface unreadable, a mute watcher in the room. I could not explain it, but even I, a man not prone to fanciful notions, felt a shiver run through me. The weekend, it seemed, would not be without incident. Chapter 2. The Shard of Silver. The day began innocently enough. A mist clung to the grounds of Maplehurst Hall like a veil unwilling to lift, casting the gardens in a gauzy grey. In the breakfast room, a fire crackled lazily, and silver teapots reflected the flame-light in delicate, trembling curves. Guests filtered in gradually, some in slippers and silk dressing gowns, others already fully dressed and feigning energy. Miss Elvira March, resplendent even before noon in a violet robe, toyed with her grapefruit, her eyes scanning the room like a theatre critic, surveying a cast. "I dreamt of tombs," she murmured, to no one in particular. "Endless corridors and the sound of sand shifting underfoot." "A delightful start to the day," said Lady Wellborn dryly, stirring her tea with exaggerated calm. Sebastian Harwood, seated at the end of the table with a folded newspaper, didn't look up. He seemed withdrawn, his spoon idle in a bowl of untouched porridge. A deep furrow ran between his brows, the sort formed not by one morning's worry, but months of mounting strain. Poirot, impeccably dressed in dove grey, leaned closer to me. "Observe, Hastings," he whispered. "The room is full of tension not yet named." He was right. A brittle quiet hovered in the air, interrupted only by the polite clink of cutlery and the occasional shifting of a chair. Even Lydia, usually attentive to her brother's moods, appeared distracted, her hands nervously folding and unfolding a linen napkin in her lap. After breakfast, the group drifted apart, some to the library, others to the conservatory, or outdoors for a walk through the bramble-edged paths. I followed Poirot to the east wing, where Harwood had installed his collection of antiquities. The museum room, as he called it, was a curious hybrid, equal parts reverence and exhibition. Glass cases lined the walls, housing everything from faded papyri to clay amulets. The air was tinged with dust, camphor, and something older, dry, elusive, and oddly metallic. At the center, upon a mahogany pedestal draped in burgundy velvet, stood the obsidian mirror. It was undeniably a captivating object. Light did not glint off its surface, it seemed to be consumed. There was no reflection, only a void, as though staring into a depthless well. Poirot circled it slowly, hands behind his back. Harwood spoke of unease, he said quietly. "But this, mon ami, this is obsession." "Superstition," I offered. "He's been around too many tombs." "Perhaps. But a man does not grow silent and hollow-eyed from folklore alone. Something here disturbs him beyond the rationale." That afternoon, the weather turned. The sky, once pale blue, thickened to a heavy slate. The wind grew teeth, whistling through cracks in the sash windows, rattling the shutters. By late evening, rain lashed at the panes in sheets and thunder muttered ominously in the distance. The guests gathered reluctantly in the drawing room after dinner. The fire blazed in the hearth, casting restless shadows along the oak-panelled walls. Harwood, in dark velvet, stood beside the mirror on the mantel, his expression unreadable. Elvira was seated on the chaise, one leg elegantly crossed over the other, her fingers adorned with rings that caught the firelight. Lady Welbourne perched near the drinks trolley, her gaze fixed on the mirror with something close to disdain. Major Darnley sprawled in an armchair, nursing a whisky and lecturing the room on ancient Nubian warfare. "I believe," Harwood interrupted, his voice low but firm, "we have not yet heard Miss March's contribution to our little tradition. A mystery from her past, perhaps?" Elvira raised a brow. "Oh, I have many, but none suitable for polite company." Laughter flickered through the room, brittle and brief. As Harwood turned to fetch a decanter, his elbow brushed the edge of the mantel. The mirror, perched precariously, tipped forward. In a flash, it fell. Time seemed to stretch. The mirror struck the marble hearth with a shattering crack. Obsidian splinters exploded like black glass rain. One shard skidded across the rug, landing inches from Lydia's slippered foot. A collective gasp filled the room. Harwood froze, staring at the ruin with an expression of such raw dread that I thought he might faint. "My God," he whispered. No, this is wrong." Lydia dropped to her knees, trembling. "It was an accident, Sebastian. No one meant—" Harwood backed away, pallid. "You don't understand? It wasn't supposed to break. It watched. It judged." Lady Welbourne clicked her tongue. "Really, Sebastian, it's only a mirror, not an oracle." But Poirot was already moving, kneeling beside the broken pieces. With his handkerchief he picked up one shard, about the size of a playing card, its edge glinting silver. He turned it slowly under the light. "Curious?" he murmured. "Very curious. This edge has been dulled, not by age, but by heat, as though it had once been scorched." He set the piece gently on a side table and straightened. "Was the mirror ever in a fire, monsieur?" Harwood's eyes twitched. "Number. At least, not to my knowledge." Poirot said nothing more, but I recognized the look on his face. A question had been born in his mind. silent but persistent. After the mirror was cleaned up, though I noticed Lady Wellborn surreptitiously slip a small shard into her handbag, Harwood excused himself abruptly. He appeared shaken to the bone, muttering something about needing air. Guests began to retreat. The storm outside had intensified, and lightning illuminated the hallways in sharp, spectral flashes. Later that night, as I lay in my guest room, half dozing to the sound of wind clawing the eaves, I heard footsteps in the corridor, not hurried, not panicked, but steady, measured. I opened the door quietly. No one was there. But in the darkness down the hall, just for a moment, I thought I saw the glint of something silver, curved and sharp, vanishing into the shadows. Chapter 3. A most curious crime. The rain had ceased during the small hours, but the dawn that followed was dull and cold, the kind that pressed low upon the landscape and seemed to muffle sound. The gravel paths of Maplehurst Hall gleamed with dampness, and puddles clung to the flagstones like pale glass. Breakfast was subdued. The butler Grice moved about with unusually stiff formality, offering coffee in silence. Lady Wellborn, wrapped in a wool shawl of uncompromising grey, declared the eggs overcooked. Miss March remained absent, and Major Darnley complained loudly of draughts and damp sheets. Sebastian Harwood had not appeared. "He's prone to morning solitude," Lydia said lightly, though her voice betrayed an undertone of unease. "He often writes in the study before joining us." But by the time the last plates were cleared and the fire had burned low, he had still not come down. It was Lydia who finally rose. "I'll fetch him. I dare say he's lost in those endless notes of his." 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then we heard her scream. Poirot and I were first up the stairs. Lydia stood pale and breathless outside the heavy oak door of the study, one hand pressed to her chest. "It's locked," she gasped. "From the inside. I knocked. I called. He didn't answer." Poirot stepped forward and rapped sharply. "Monsieur Harwood, it is Poirot. Are you well?" No reply. Grice appeared behind us with a ring of keys, his face bloodless. "Only the master and I hold copies," he said faintly. He selected the brass key, trembling, and inserted it. The lock turned with a reluctant click. Poirot raised a hand. "No one enter but me," he said quietly. "Let me see it first." He pushed the door open. The study was in a state of quiet disarray. Heavy drapes blocked most of the morning light, casting long grey shadows across the carpet. A single lamp glowed dimly on the writing desk where papers were strewn about in disorder. And in the centre of the room, slumped in a low armchair, was Sebastian Harwood, head tilted back unnaturally, eyes wide open and unseeing. Blood had soaked through his shirt just above the sternum, forming a dark blossom at the heart. The hilt of a ceremonial dagger protruded from his chest. Poirot moved silently across the room, stooping to examine the body without touching it. A moment later, he turned to me. "He's quite dead, mon ami, and not long so. The body is still warm." A faint noise escaped from Lydia, a half-stifled sob, or perhaps the beginning of one. Poirot gestured gently for her to remain outside. He stepped back, scanning the room with precise attention. There were no signs of forced entry. The windows were closed, the curtains undisturbed. The fireplace held cold ashes, the poker untouched. On the desk, a small inkwell had been overturned, staining several papers with a wine-dark blot. And on the rug, near the foot of the chair, lay a familiar object, a shard of black glass. Poirot crouched again. He used a gloved finger to lift the edge of the fragment. "A piece of the mirror," I murmured. "Oui," he said softly. "One that should have been collected and discarded last night. And yet, it finds itself here." Inspector Montfort arrived from the local station within the hour, a tall, stooped man with an expression of perpetual concern and a habit of murmuring his thoughts aloud. He greeted Poirot with due deference and quickly ceded control of the scene. "Everything appears in order," he muttered. Locked door, no open windows, no signs of robbery, but that dagger, it's one of the Egyptian pieces from the hall, isn't it? Poirot nodded. It belonged to Harwood's collection. The blade, I believe, is ceremonial. Not designed for strength, but for message. Montfort blinked. Message? Poirot said nothing for a moment. His gaze had fallen on a curious object on the windowsill, a half-folded handkerchief bearing a faint smudge of rouge. He pocketed it quietly. The guests had been summoned to the drawing-room and sat in subdued silence. Lady Welbourne was knitting furiously, though the needles trembled slightly. Major Darnley paced with the restless energy of a man better suited to action than waiting. Miss March had finally appeared, swathed in a dark blue dress and a silk turban that added unnecessary drama to the proceedings. Her expression was carefully blank. Poirot stood by the fireplace. "Monsieur Harwood is dead," he announced gently. "Murdered." A collective breath caught in the room. "There are two matters of interest," Poirot continued. "First, the circumstances. The study door was locked from within. There are no footprints, no signs of forced entry, no weapon beyond the one left in his chest. And yet, we must believe that someone entered, committed murder, and departed, leaving the room apparently undisturbed. Elvira," said Lady Welbourne suddenly. "She was missing at breakfast." Elvira blinked. "Are you accusing me, madam? You're the one with a flair for theatrical entrances and exits." "I was unwell," Elvira replied coldly. "I suffer from migraines. Surely not a crime yet." Poirot raised a hand. "Let us not point fingers without knowledge. This morning's tragedy may hide behind last night's mystery. We must consider all details, the mirror, the blood, the words Harwood spoke after it shattered." "You mean that nonsense about it judging him?" Darnley scoffed. "The man was brilliant, but he'd gone rather peculiar, hadn't he?" Poirot turned toward him slowly. "Did you speak with him after dinner?" Darnley hesitated. "Briefly, in the hall. He seemed unsettled, kept asking strange questions. Whether I believed in omens. In curses, and what did you say? That a man makes his own fate, and superstition is for the weak." Poirot gave a slight smile. "How very English of you, Major." Poirot spent the remainder of the afternoon interviewing the household. Lydia, pale and shaking, insisted she had not seen her brother after retiring for the night. Grice, the butler, admitted to hearing low voices around midnight but could not identify who had passed the study door. The parlour-maid claimed to have seen Elvira descend the main staircase close to 2 in the morning, though Elvira denied it entirely. Back in the study, Poirot stood once more before the empty chair, eyes narrowed. "A locked room," he murmured. "But every lock has its key, every illusion its mechanism." He picked up the mirror shard again. "This," he said quietly, "was not forgotten. It was planted." Chapter 4. Among the Guests. The mood within Maplehurst Hall had transformed entirely. The charm of the country retreat was gone. Where once stood gracious formality, now hung unease. A man was dead, murdered in his study, and though no one dared say it outright, each guest looked at the other with veiled suspicion. Poirot, calm as always, insisted that lunch proceed as usual. "Routine," he said, "has a soothing quality. And for clarity of mind, mon ami, nothing is more fatal than rumour left to roam." By mid-afternoon, a low fog had settled over the grounds. It wrapped the house in a hushed stillness, softening footsteps and muting voices. Poirot had requested Inspector Montfort permit him to conduct his interviews privately. The inspector, perhaps secretly relieved, obliged. The small parlour off the main corridor had been prepared for the purpose. A coal fire burned low in the grate, and Poirot, seated beside a writing desk, received the guests one by one. First, Lady Welbourne. She entered as if summoned to the royal court, chin high, her gloves immaculate. "You knew Mr. Harwood long?" Poirot asked gently. 30 years, she replied, folding herself into the winged armchair. "Since his marriage to Daphne, a splendid woman, much too good for him." Yet you remained in contact. We shared mutual obligations, she said tightly. Charitable boards, the Preservation Society. Poirot tapped his fingertips together. And last evening, when the mirror broke, you seemed unshaken. Because I do not subscribe to melodrama, she sniffed. Unlike certain others in this house. You retrieved a shard of the mirror. Her eyes narrowed. Yes, a token. An object lesson in how men chase relics and find nothing but broken glass. Poirot inclined his head. You will understand if I ask to examine your token? She produced it promptly from her handbag, and he examined it under the lamp. Curious, he murmured. A single fingerprint. Not yours, I presume? She said nothing. Second, Major Darnley. He arrived with a whiskey already in hand. His military bearing was intact, but the veneer was fraying. I suppose this is where I defend my innocence, he said, lowering himself onto the settee. Poirot's smile was thin. Not at all, Major. I seek only clarity. Did you quarrel with Mr. Harwood? Darnley exhaled. He'd implied I falsified reports in Cairo, utter rot, jealousy perhaps, or boredom. You spoke after dinner? Yes, he asked odd things about guilt, regret, whether I believed the past could claw its way forward. Poirot tilted his head. And what did you reply? That men like us bury the past with a shovel. Poirot scribbled a note. Did you return to your room after? Yes, straight away, slept like the dead. Poirot looked up. But the maid did not see you return, nor did she hear you snoring. Darnley's fingers tightened on his glass. She's a village girl, likely half-deaf. Poirot said nothing. Third, Miss Elvira March. She swept in with her usual flair, a silk scarf fluttering at her throat. I feel quite like a character in one of those dreadful stage thrillers, she sighed, reclining with an air of deliberate fragility. Poirot's tone remained warm. Mademoiselle, you were seen descending the stairs in the early hours. Her lips parted, then closed. I went for water, couldn't sleep. You passed the study? Yes, the door was shut. A light showed underneath, but I heard nothing. No voices? She hesitated. Perhaps a whisper. But it could have been the wind. This house groans like an old ship at night. Poirot regarded her for a moment. You left a handkerchief on the windowsill. She smiled faintly. I must be more careless than I thought. He withdrew the folded cloth and placed it before her. A faint rouge stain marked the linen. I was speaking to Sebastian, she said quietly. Just for a moment? He was restless. He'd been drinking. He talked of regrets. His will. His will? She nodded. He said he intended to change it. To punish someone. Did he name them? Number. But he seemed frightened. Poirot leaned back. And how did your conversation end? I told him not to be a fool. Then I left. Fourth, Lydia Harwood. She entered hesitantly, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. I keep expecting him to walk in, she said. Even now. Poirot's tone softened. You loved your brother? Of course I did. He raised me. I was only a child when our parents died. And yet, you were afraid of him. A little? She blinked. What makes you say that? Poirot smiled gently. You flinched when he shouted last night. You apologized instinctively. That is not the reflex of a confident sibling. She looked down. Sebastian had moods. He was brilliant but possessive. That mirror. It changed something in him. He would stare into it for hours. He said it told him things. What kind of things? Things he didn't want to know. Poirot was silent for a moment. You went to his study this morning. You found the door locked. But were you there in the night? No, she whispered. I was in my room. Poirot watched her closely. Miss Lydia, do you know what your brother planned to do with his estate? She swallowed. He said he was revising the will, but he wouldn't tell me the details. Did you fear he might disinherit you? She hesitated. Then softly, yes. Fifth, the staff Poirot interviewed Gryce and the housemaid Molly separately. Gryce revealed that Mr. Harwood had requested a fresh decanter of whiskey around midnight but had appeared jittery, muttering to himself about voices and betrayal. Molly, shy and nervous, admitted she had seen Miss March return up the stairs at roughly 2 a.m., her expression strange and her hands shaking. She also remembered a second figure, someone in slippers, moving past the library doors around midnight. But I couldn't see their face, she said. Just the robe, red velvet. Lydia's robe. That evening, Poirot sat in the drawing room alone, watching the fire crackle. I joined him quietly. Well, I asked. Do you know who did it? Poirot nodded once. I do not yet know who, but I know how it was done, and why. He tapped the mirror shard on the table beside him. Harwood's death was no spur-of-the-moment act. It was designed, staged, with precision. The clue lies not only in the dagger, but in the ink. I stared at him. The ink? Poirot gave a small, satisfied smile. Tomorrow, Hastings, I shall ask Inspector Montfort for access to the waste bin beneath Harwood's desk. There, I suspect, we shall find what someone hoped had vanished. A letter, written in red ink. A letter that never reached its recipient. Chapter 5. The Story of the Mirror. The following morning broke grey and unsettled, with clouds that seemed to cling low over the gables of Maplehurst Hall. Inside, the atmosphere was taut with expectancy. Conversations dropped when footsteps passed the threshold, and teacups rattled in their saucers just a touch louder than necessary. After breakfast, Poirot requested that the guests remain within the house. The truth, he said, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous calm, has a curious habit. It dislikes being chased, but it cannot abide confinement. He departed to the study with Inspector Montfort, who returned moments later carrying a leather-bound waste bin. Poirot set it on the table in the drawing room like a sacred relic. "Let us see," he said, reaching in with a gloved hand, "what Monsieur Harwood intended to discard and what someone else hoped would never be found." From beneath a scattering of torn envelopes and blotting paper, he withdrew a crumpled page, creased, stained, and marked with red ink. The ink had bled in patches as though a drop of water, or perhaps something else, had spilled across it. But enough of the writing remained. "You think I'm blind, don't you? You think you can make a fool of me? I saw the robe. I saw the look on her face, and I'm changing everything. The will, the future. You're finished. All of you. Don't think I won't." The sentence trailed off in a jagged, unfinished scrawl. I felt the hairs at the back of my neck prickle. Poirot folded the paper neatly. A draft never sent, or perhaps never delivered. "Who is he writing to?" I asked. Poirot glanced across the room, where Lydia sat by the window, arms folded, eyes closed against the storm within. "She will tell us," he said softly. He approached her with that impeccable gentleness that belied his steely resolve. "Miss Lydia," he began, "your brother was planning to change his will. He believed himself betrayed, and in this note he speaks of a robe, red velvet." Her shoulders stiffened. "Yes," she whispered. "It was mine." Poirot nodded. "You were seen wearing it after midnight. The maid remembers." Lydia did not deny it. "I went to him," she said, voice barely audible. "After everyone had gone to bed. I couldn't sleep. I had a feeling." "What sort of feeling?" "That something was ending, or about to begin." Poirot took a chair opposite her. "Tell me everything." She opened her eyes, and for the first time since Sebastian's death, there was no hesitation in her voice, only weariness, the kind that comes from secrets held too long. He was sitting by the fire, holding that cursed mirror. The study was dark except for the lamplight and the flames. He said it had shown him the truth, that no one could hide from it. Did he mention the will? He said he'd written a new draft that day, that he was going to leave most of the estate to Miss March. Did that surprise you? Lydia's laugh was hollow. Not really. Elvira had been charming him for weeks. He was always susceptible to adoration. And I was only his sister. Convenient, familiar. And did you argue? Number 1 simply asked why. He wouldn't answer. He just held up the mirror and said, "She sees me. You don't." Then he dismissed me, like a servant. Poirot leaned forward. And then? I left. I returned to my room and cried myself to sleep. Her hands trembled. "I didn't kill him, Monsieur Poirot. I was hurt, yes, but I didn't kill him." Poirot nodded, his voice steady. "You spoke of the mirror as cursed. Why?" She drew in a long, shallow breath. "Because ever since he brought it home, something changed in him. He became secretive, moody. He stopped sleeping. He said the mirror was Egyptian, used by priests to channel judgment. He believed it was watching, that it could see past lies." A superstition? Perhaps, but he wasn't mad. He was afraid. And when it broke, he looked at me and said, "Now it's free." Free? I don't know what he meant, but I remember his face. It was like someone standing at the edge of something they couldn't name. Poirot stood, gently taking the red ink letter from the table. "This note," he said, "was meant for someone, but not you." Lydia looked up sharply. "Then who?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mademoiselle, is what we must now determine." Later that day, Poirot summoned Inspector Montfort and requested access to Harwood's safe. It had been discovered discreetly in the wall behind a reproduction of the death of Socrates in the study. Within it, among a handful of financial records, was a legal envelope marked "Will Draft Revised." Poirot opened it slowly. Inside was a 3-page document, initialed and dated, but unsigned. It clearly left Maplehurst Hall, its estate, and the contents of Harwood's collection to Miss Elvira March. Lydia's name appeared once, a modest annuity. I glanced at Poirot. He wasn't bluffing. "No," said Poirot quietly. He intended to disinherit his own sister, for a woman of theatre and illusion. He slipped the document into a folder. "And that," he added, "makes Miss March our next subject of interest." But before Poirot could call for her, Elvira appeared herself. She walked into the drawing room with purpose, her usual affectation of glamour stripped away. There was something harder in her posture now, her chin higher, her voice sharper. "I suppose you've found it," she said. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, mademoiselle, a draft, never finalized. Still, it says quite a bit." She gave a brittle smile. "He promised me the house, all of it. Said I made him feel alive again." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You seemed rather detached for a woman who had just lost a benefactor." "Because I knew it was coming, death." He said the mirror had warned him. She turned to the window. "He was obsessed with it. Said it whispered to him at night." "Did it whisper to you?" She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "It showed me my face, nothing more. But I wonder what it showed him." Poirot watched her for a long moment. "Tell me, Miss March, where were you between midnight and 2 o'clock? "In my room, reading." "You were seen downstairs?" "Then they saw wrong." Poirot nodded slowly. "Very well." That evening, as the fog thickened and the house fell into uneasy silence once more, Poirot returned to the study alone. He placed the shard of mirror on the desk beside the red ink letter. Then he whispered to the empty room, "It is not judgment I fear, but deception." The mirror, of course, gave no reply, but something told him that the surface, if it could speak, would reflect not guilt, but purpose. And in the morning he would ask the final question. Chapter 6. A trace of red ink. The fog thickened overnight, muffling the world beyond the windows of Maplehurst Hall. It lent the house an almost dreamlike quality, solid yet suspended, as though floating within its own secrets. Poirot was up early, immaculately pressed and alert. His breakfast was light, coffee, toast, a soft-boiled egg, but his mind already seemed far from the dining table. "Hastings," he said, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin, "today we begin to untie the knots, one by one, and we begin not with murder, but with a stroke of ink." I looked at him, puzzled. "The red ink letter?" "Just so," he nodded, "and more precisely, its handwriting." An hour later, in the study, Poirot stood with Inspector Montfort and the late Mr. Harwood's legal correspondence. Laid out across the desk were several letters, the unsigned will draft, and the red-inked note recovered from the bin. Poirot handed me a magnifying glass. "Observe the loops, mon ami. Look at the G in changing, the cross of the T in think." I peered closer. "They don't match. Not quite." "No," Poirot said softly. "They do not. The ink is Harwood's. He always used that shade for drafts, but the hand, it is not his." Montfort frowned. "Are you saying the note was forged?" "Fabricated, yes. But not to fool Harwood. No, it was created after his death. To mislead us." Montfort's eyebrows rose. "But who would—" Poirot held up a gloved hand. "First, we finish our observations. Then we name our suspicions." He gestured to Gryce, who entered promptly carrying the sealed envelope containing the official will, drawn up a month prior, witnessed, and lodged with Harwood's solicitor. Poirot compared the two, the official document and the revised unsigned draft that left everything to Elvira March. "Now look here," he said, laying the two side by side. "The official will is written on monogrammed paper. The draft, plain bond." Montfort blinked. "So the new will might be a fake as well?" Poirot nodded. "It is a construction, a carefully staged one. Our killer did not merely strike a man down. They staged a motive, a story. And now we know it was a story that had to be told after the murder." Montfort exhaled. "So someone forged the letter and placed it in the bin?" "Yes. And the mirror shard placed near the body? Also staged, meant to suggest an emotional rupture, a symbolic gesture." Poirot turned to the evidence box and retrieved the shard Lady Welborn had handed over. "Now we consider the fingerprint." He moved to a side table where a small envelope had been delivered from the local constabulary. "I requested a comparison," he explained. "Fingerprints were taken discreetly from glassware at dinner 2 nights ago. The fingerprint on this shard—" He opened the envelope. "Belongs to Miss Lydia Harwood." Montfort sat back. "So she was in the study?" Poirot raised a hand. "We knew that already. She confessed as much. What matters is that the shard bearing her print was not near her brother until the morning after, which means someone not Lydia, placed it there after retrieving it." He looked at me. "Tell me, Hastings, who had access to the mirror fragments?" I considered. "Lady Welborn. She took a piece, but she returned it." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. But others could have done the same. Molly, the maid, swept the fragments. She left the bin in the linen room. It sat there overnight. Unwatched. Unattended, he corrected. And I suspect, violated." He turned toward the door. "Let us take a stroll. I believe we need to speak to the gardener's wife again." In a low cottage near the stables, Mrs. Elspeth Greaves welcomed us with polite suspicion. She was stout, hard-handed, and had the air of someone who had seen more than she would say, unless asked precisely the right question. Poirot wasted no time. "Madame, on the night the mirror broke, you were near the back stairs?" She squinted. "I was in the drying room, sir. Heard the thunder and thought the laundry might be leaking." "Did you see anyone?" Her eyes narrowed. "Didn't see so much as hear. Slippers. A creaky tread. Not the butler's. Lighter. Younger." "Could it have been Miss Lydia?" "Number she walks differently. Careful like." Poirot leaned in. "Madame, if I asked you to identify who passed by, not by face but by step, would you recognize them?" She hesitated. "Could have been that actress, the tall one." "Elvira March." She gave a reluctant nod. "She walks like she's on stage, soft but with a pause before every heel strike. I remember it." Poirot smiled faintly. Merci, madame. You have helped more than you know. Back at Maplehurst, Poirot gathered us in the parlour once more. The fog still curled outside and lamps had been lit early. Lady Welbourne was knitting furiously. Darnley smoked in silence. Lydia sat folded inward, hands clenched. Elvira March entered last, cool and composed. Poirot stood, arms crossed behind his back. We are nearing the truth, he said, and soon it shall speak for itself. No one responded. Poirot continued. The mirror was never cursed, but it was convenient. A symbol, a weapon of fear. Our killer used it, not because they believed in its power, but because they knew others did. He lifted the forged letter. This was not written by Sebastian Harwood. It was created by someone who wanted us to believe he died in the middle of a paranoid outburst, betrayed, irrational, unstable. He turned to Elvira. You claim he promised you the house, that he was rewriting his will for your sake. She met his gaze. He did. Poirot's voice grew quiet. Then why was the draft unsigned? Why leave no instructions for a solicitor? Elvira hesitated. He said he wanted to deliver it himself. Poirot shook his head. No, the will was never meant to be found because it was a prop, a distraction. The real motive lies elsewhere. He drew out one final object, the red velvet robe. I found this hidden behind a panel in the dressing room, he said. Its cuffs are stained with something faint, but present. He turned to Inspector Montfort. Have it tested. I believe it will reveal sheep's blood. Gasps echoed around the room. Sheep's blood, I whispered. Poirot nodded. Used to stage a scene, the body, the inkwell, the mirror, all part of a tableau meant to control the story. And now I believe we have just one more question to ask. He turned toward Lydia. Mademoiselle, do you know where your brother kept the original signed will? She looked startled. In his safe, I thought. Poirot smiled faintly. Then someone has taken it, because it is no longer there. That night, Poirot sat again by the fire, his eyes half closed. The murderer, he said softly, is clever, but not perfect. In seeking to control the story, they left fingerprints on the truth. He tapped the red ink letter. And tomorrow, Hastings, we let the truth speak for itself. Chapter 7. The Garden Confession. The fog had finally lifted by morning, revealing dew-slick lawns and tangled rose trellises heavy with damp petals. The air was cool and freshly scrubbed, yet the unease within Maplehurst Hall remained thick, like smoke that clings long after the fire is out. Poirot rose early and, with Inspector Montfort in tow, made an uncharacteristic request to walk the gardens. I joined them, surprised to see Poirot step onto the wet grass without complaint about his patent leather shoes. There is something about the morning light, he murmured, that uncovers what the night seeks to hide. As we passed the sundial path, Montfort glanced toward the orchard. You really believe the robe had sheep's blood? Ah, but I do not believe, mon cher, Poirot replied. I know, the analysis came this morning. No human blood. The scene was staged. Just like the letter, just like the will. We crossed into a narrow, hedge-lined passage where the late Mr. Harwood's topiary animals stood in oddly contorted shapes. Poirot paused. You know, I have been thinking about Major Darnley, he said lightly, and about that conversation he had with Harwood, the one he claimed was brief. Montfort raised a brow. You suspect it wasn't? I suspect, said Poirot, that it was rather more consequential than the Major would like us to know. And as if summoned, Major Darnley appeared ahead, standing by the stone bench at the edge of the formal garden, a cigarette clamped tightly between his fingers. He did not look surprised to see us. Decided to interrogate me among the daffodils, have you? He said, without warmth. No, Major, said Poirot calmly. but I think it is time you told us what truly happened between you and Harwood on the night he died." The Major looked away, jaw clenched. "You already know everything." "No," Poirot said gently. "I know that Harwood threatened you. I know that your past in Egypt is not as glorious as you made it sound." Darnley's silence cracked then. He turned, the lines around his mouth deeper now. He found out about Cairo, about the bribes. And he was going to expose you? Darnley nodded slowly. He said he had letters, evidence, said he'd give them to the papers. Ruin me. Poirot stepped closer. "And so you argued, loudly." Molly heard raised voices. "You were seen near the study. Yet, you did not kill him." Darnley blinked. "Number the way I thought about it. God help me, I was furious, but I walked out, went to the stable for air. I didn't go back." Poirot studied him a moment. "You have nothing to gain from a lie now, especially when the truth already damns you halfway." The Major's shoulders dropped. "You're right. I was a coward. I ran from the war and then I ran from him, but I didn't stab the man." Poirot gave a small nod. "You may yet be punished, Major, but not by me." Back at the hall, word came that a member of the staff had requested to speak with Poirot, Molly, the parlour maid. She stood at the threshold of the study, clutching her apron in trembling hands. "I didn't know it was important," she began. "But I think I saw something the night before Mr. Harwood was found." Poirot gestured kindly. "Please, tell us." "I was carrying a tray back to the scullery just after midnight. I passed the green corridor, near the library, and I saw someone go into the study." "Who?" I thought it was Miss Lydia at first. She wears the red robe, but this person, she moved differently, taller, quieter. She kept looking back over her shoulder, like she didn't want to be seen." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You're sure she entered the study?" Molly nodded. "Yes, she used a key, a small one on a chain." Poirot leaned in. "And when she came out?" "She was holding a folder, cream paper. I only saw it for a second. She slipped it under her arm and walked fast." He nodded slowly. "You've done well, Molly. This will help bring justice." That afternoon, Poirot summoned Miss Elvira March to the drawing room. She entered warily, mascara perfectly applied, but a flicker of uncertainty danced behind her theatrical poise. "Miss March," Poirot said, "I will ask you plainly. Do you possess a key to the study?" She hesitated. "Number, of course not." Poirot opened a drawer and produced a thin chain with a small, ornate key attached. "This was found behind the panel in your dressing room, the same place you hid the bloodied robe." Elvira's jaw tightened. "That proves nothing." Poirot tilted his head. "It proves motive and method. You went to the study late that night. You forged the red ink letter. You planted the mirror shard with Lydia's print. You even made a fake draft of the will." Her eyes widened. "You can't prove that." "I can," he replied gently. "Because your handwriting appears not only on the forged letter, but also on a script you left in the library yesterday. The loops, the pressure, the crossed T's, so distinctive." Silence fell like a curtain. Then she said very softly, "He told me he was changing the will, but then he hesitated, said he'd wait, said I didn't understand him." "And you were afraid?" Poirot finished. "Afraid you'd be written out." "He made promises," she snapped. "He wanted someone to adore him." "I did. I gave him the illusion he needed. And I deserved that house more than his bitter little sister." Poirot looked at her with something close to sorrow. "You staged everything so that Lydia would appear the jealous one, so that the will would suggest a motive, so that no one would think to look at you." "I didn't mean to kill him," she said, voice trembling now. "I just wanted to scare him, just a little. But he turned, and the dagger—" She didn't finish. Poirot nodded once. Inspector Montfort, waiting in the hall, entered quietly. "Elvira March," he said, "I must ask you to come with me." She didn't resist. That evening, Poirot and I sat in the parlour. The mirror shard still lay on the mantel, catching the fading gold of the sun. "So," I said, "she staged everything. The robe, the blood, the forged will, a performance worthy of any West End stage. And the mirror?" Poirot smiled faintly. It never judged, but it reflected a truth, that people will believe anything if dressed well enough in mystery. Chapter 8. The mirror reflects all. The drawing room of Maplehurst Hall was bathed in late afternoon sunlight. Long golden rays pierced the tall windows, catching dust in the air like powdered gold. The scent of wood smoke and lavender polish mingled faintly in the room, and yet, beneath the calm elegance, tension sat like a coiled spring. Poirot stood near the mantelpiece, the broken shard of obsidian mirror resting behind him, gleaming black and silent. Gathered before him were the last occupants of the house. Lady Welbourne sat erect on the edge of her chair, knitting untouched in her lap. Major Darnley leaned against the window ledge, a whisky in hand, his expression blank. Lydia Harwood sat furthest from the light, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, pale but composed. Inspector Montfort stood by the door, notepad closed, watching. Elvira March was absent. "She is in the custody of the police," Poirot said gently. "But it is fitting that you, the remaining witnesses to this tragedy, understand why she committed murder, and how she attempted to hide it beneath smoke and shadows." No one spoke. Poirot took a step forward. "You all saw the fragments," he began. "The broken mirror, the bloodied floor, the forged will, the locked door, all designed, crafted, to suggest a man spiraling into madness and a sister driven to rage by betrayal." He turned to Lydia. "You were meant to be the perfect suspect, disinherited, humiliated, the robe, the fingerprint, the blood, each a performance. But mademoiselle, you were merely a tool. The killer was Miss Elvira March." Lydia gasped. Lady Welbourne shut her eyes. Poirot continued, "Elvira seduced your brother, not out of love, but opportunity. She believed Sebastian Harwood to be vulnerable, vain, and desperate for adoration. She was not wrong. He promised her the world, but he hesitated. Perhaps he sensed the truth behind her gaze, or perhaps, after shattering the mirror, he finally saw her." Poirot retrieved a folded paper from the table. This forged letter, written in red ink, was planted in the wastebasket after the murder. Its script mimics Harwood's, but it bears Elvira's distinctive hand, the same found in a rehearsal script she left behind. He turned to Darnley. "And the supposed argument? Real, but not fatal. You fled the scene, shaken but innocent. Harwood lived on." Poirot picked up the shard of mirror. This too was planted. It bore Lydia's fingerprint, but it was collected from the linen bin where the maid had placed the fragments. Elvira retrieved it and added it to the scene after the murder. A masterstroke of misdirection. He paused. "Now the dagger, ritualistic, Egyptian. It belonged to Harwood's collection, but Elvira knew its significance. She placed it in his chest, not in anger, but with intent, to echo the very myth of the mirror he adored, to make his death feel inevitable, ancient, cursed." Poirot looked into the fire for a moment, then turned. Most chilling of all was the robe. It had been soaked with sheep's blood and hidden behind a panel in Elvira's room. She did not wear it during the act, but staged it as if someone had. As if Lydia had approached, furious and betrayed, and then attacked. Inspector Montfort nodded slowly. "And the will?" Poirot held up two documents. The genuine will, still in possession of Harwood's solicitor, leaves Maplehurst and its contents to Lydia Harwood. The forged draft names Elvira and bears no signature. She created it to support her lie, but it lacked legal standing. A long silence followed. Lady Welbourne broke it, her voice dry as leaves. "And why did she kill him?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "Because he disappointed her. She thought herself a rising star again, mistress of a grand estate. But Harwood, in his final clarity, saw through the artifice. He hesitated, and she panicked. In that moment, she chose certainty over patience, murder over ambiguity. He turned to Lydia. "I am sorry. You loved your brother even when he forgot how to love you in return. His last act, unknown to you, was one of protection. The true will was never changed." Lydia's lips trembled. "He meant to keep me here?" Poirot nodded. He was misled, but not blind. In the end, he remembered where his roots lay. Montfort stepped forward. "We'll proceed with formal charges. The case is complete." Poirot nodded. "Merci, Inspector." That evening, as the sun set over Maplehurst's damp lawns, Poirot and I walked once more through the formal garden. The mirror shard, now sealed in an evidence envelope, had been taken away. "You know," I said, "it almost seemed like the mirror was cursed." Poirot chuckled softly. "No, Hastings, not cursed, but powerful, yes. Not by magic, but by meaning. People fear the truth and what it might reflect. That is why Elvira tried so hard to control the story." He looked toward the horizon, where the sky glowed mauve and gold. "But truth, mon ami, always shines through the cracks, even in Obsidian." I smiled. "Another case closed." He adjusted his gloves with a satisfied air. "But of course,